could you please introduce yourself?
Okay, well, my name is Ann Ogilvie, and I am the counselor at Vickery Creek Elementary School, and I've been here, I think this is my 9th year at this school. Is that good?
Yeah. What led you to choose a career in counseling?
Well, as I was going to tell you guys, as a college student, I was kind of forced to choose a major because I couldn't decide, because I didn't really have any guidance through high school or even college at the beginning.
And that would have been a huge benefit.
Yes. I think it was my senior year in college that I actually met with a counselor finally there, to kind of help me. It was very interesting though. I was a psychology major, and the reason I was a psychology major, that's probably not good for video, but is because my best friend was a psychology major, and I had to pick a field and didn't know what to do. And I had taken a psychology class. It was interesting. Psychology, so I thought I was done making decisions until my senior year, and that was when basically they said, well, there's really not much you can do with a psychology degree, and I'm like, great.
Unless you get your master's.
And so then I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, but I did have a couple of internships in my undergrad. One was with the Boys and Girls Club, and the other was with my mother worked for hospice in North Carolina, and they had a bereavement group for children. Okay. And so I did my other semester internship there. So honestly, never thought I'd want to work with kids, little kids, but thought I would be high school at that time because my mom's best friend was a counselor, and so she was kind of my role model, and kind of talked me into it. And one of the things about the program that they offered in North Carolina was that it was an evening program, so I could work all day. So I went straight from my
What was the name of that program?
It's North Carolina A&T.
Okay.
Now, and it's a minority school, so I was able to get I was the minority, so I was able to get a minority scholarship. So that was very helpful. The classroom was made up mostly of teachers going back to get their master's degree because they were teaching during the day, and going to school at night. I, with my psychology degree, worked in a bank. So I did that throughout until I was able to get a practicum in an elementary school. And so that helped because I was getting paid to finish, and
right.
So financially,
It was a big help.
Yeah. But yes, so, I thought high school, then I thought maybe middle school, and then I kind of fell into elementary and just fell in love with it. So, and I did middle school for 1 year, but 1 year.
All right. What type of training and education did you receive?
I would say probably the program that I was in was more hours than a lot of the programs.
What was the name of that program?
Well, it was at A&T State University,
right.
And it was a degree in counselor education.
Okay.
Now, I don't know why I'm looking at my degree, they call it a Master of Science in Counselor Education. I always, when they say, what's your degree, and I say educational counseling, because it just makes more sense to people. But their program was 60 hours. And a lot of the master's programs are 34, 36. So it was a little more, and I would say the training, you could have gotten a minor as well. Do you know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. But since I wasn't a teacher, although I took many special ed classes as my kind of electives, and they were like, oh, you can get your minor in special education, I would have had to have done a student teaching portion, and that at that time did not seem interesting. And they do the best they can in those programs, but nothing prepares you, until you get here. You know what you're supposed to be doing, and then you hear what you will be doing, and you try to figure out the happy medium.
Right. So. Well, the next question is, how did your training best prepare you?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think back to my training, and I would say, since I had never been in a school setting before, most school counselors that you will talk to, and I shouldn't say most, but a lot of them have been teachers. And they went from teaching into the classroom and then decided they wanted to be a counselor.
Interesting.
So some programs, like when my husband and I got married and we moved to Las Vegas, we were looking at different places. Some places actually required you to have teaching experience in order to be a school counselor. Nevada did not. You just had to take a few classes that they required. But I would say that I would say they best prepared you for understanding what the teaching portion, because sometimes, people think the school counselor, and when they hear the word counselor, in public, I do live in this community, so I will see people in Walmart all the time. Kids that, I know their face, but I don't, their name, and they're like, Miss Ogilvie, and I'm like, hey, and their parents are looking at me like, who are you talking to,
Yeah.
And they'll say, that's my counselor, and they're like, you're what? Because they're
Yeah.
thinking, why is my child seeing a counselor? But I think that most people don't understand that school counselor, there's such a big educational component. So about 50% of our time is spent in the classroom, which we have a curriculum that we teach based on the county standards. We have our own standards, which goes in with the state standards, which also ties into the national standards. So, so we have, certain things that we have to get in, but also get into the classroom that's how you get to know the kids, and so that if there is an issue and,
And,
you're
yeah.
seeing them individually or in small group, it's not a scary situation.
Right. So did you do the Boys and Girls Club before?
So, yeah.
That wasn't your practicum?
No, my practicum ended up being at an elementary school in the middle of nowhere, North Carolina, because their counselor had left and they were kind of,
Short-handed.
it's hard to get practicums in counseling because
Right.
there do seem to be a lot of qualified people. But I guess it just depends on where you're at. So that worked out.
I know you already answered this, but how long have you been a counselor?
And like I said, I think this has been, 13 here, 14, 15, 19 years? Oh, gosh, I feel old. Okay.
Do you have a specialization or clinical focus?
I would say that in this county, I've always worked in the south portion of this county, which we have a reputation of being, some of the southern counties have a reputation of being, well, that's an easy school because you've got high economic, you know what I'm saying? And in the northern schools, there's more poverty.
Right.
And so people, it's a good mixture, but this school, and this previous school that I worked at were very affluent. And I always say that the affluent, they just had their problems better. Do you know what I'm saying? I mean, they're educated enough to know better. But the one thing that I have run across, and I cannot say per se I am clinically trained in this area, but anxiety is our hugest, just like I was talking beforehand about the anxiety that kids feel, pressured to choose a career in the 8th grade. That has been huge here, and I'd say Forsyth County in general. We have vertical team meetings that we just began this year, where we meet with all the feeder schools for our high schools. We have our high school, West Forsyth,
Okay.
and then all the middle schools that feed into that, and then all the elementary schools that feed into the middle schools, where we kind of have a combined meeting, a
Right.
monthly meeting.
Okay.
We just had our first meeting, getting to know each other, and everyone, like, what do you think the biggest issue is? And everyone, it was
Said anxiety.
the anxiety piece. It was the anxiety piece coupled with the lack of responsibility, the helicopter parents, doing
Yeah.
things for the kids, which those two may tie together, but,
Yeah, they tie together big
yeah.
time.
But I'm not only a counselor, but I'm a mom, and I have a sophomore at the high school, and then I have a 3rd grader here. And both of my kids, one in 5th grade was diagnosed with OCD. And so I have a lot of the anxiety, unfortunately, a lot of the anxiety that I have educated myself about, that I have met with counselors and psychiatrists and psychologists, and then just recently, as in like 2 weeks ago, my son was also diagnosed with OCD. So,
The older son.
the younger one.
Oh, okay,
in
so the
3rd
older one was
grade.
first.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the older one was first, but it was about the same age, around 10 years.
Okay.
And what I noticed here, and I feel like everything happens for a reason, is that I've been able to use my experience to help
help
people
others,
here.
yeah.
Yeah, I really, because I saw this before, but then when it happens to your own kids, it gives you a whole new perspective on things. But around.
What were some of the symptoms?
What are some of the symptoms?
Yeah.
Well, you look back as a parent and you go, oh, why didn't I catch that? But for my daughter, I don't mind saying, and she knows I talk about her and that I use her as an example because I say she's a success case, I tell her that.
Well, OCD can be kind of a good thing too.
Yes, and that's what it's like.
Neat,
Everyone has a little
organized.
bit, yeah. But it's when you get too much.
Right.
You know, it was really odd. It happened over the summer, and she actually went to her grandparents' house and got hurt. Not in a really bad way. It just scared her, and it was like a light. And she started having panic attacks, and she developed this fear of dying. I didn't know what her fear was. I didn't know what was going on. All I knew is that she couldn't breathe at night, and it was like she became this hypochondriac. Everything's wrong with me. Multiple trips to the emergency room. And because of my connections here, I was able to say, I need a good counselor, tell me. Sent me to the counselor. The counselor was like, you need to go see this psychiatrist. And my husband and I joke, because parents here, and I totally understand, this also is very helpful, is that you don't want your kids on meds. I totally get that. But there comes a point where you're almost begging for them because you're like, what else is going to work? I don't know what to do.
Right.
And so that was what we did, and it's been a godsend to her. I mean, I feel like, you know, the community resources that I was able to get in touch with, that they saved us. You know, they saved our family.
Right.
It's very stressful. This time around, I'm a little more attuned to things, and so I had just told my husband a couple weeks ago, I'm starting to notice a few things with Davis. You know, just the, Mommy, am I going to pass third grade? And I'm like, yeah, you know, he's
Yeah.
like, are you sure? Are you sure I'm going to pass third grade? You know, and starting getting stressed out about homework, and until I told him that day on the phone, Mark, I'm starting to see some symptoms of the OCD, the obsessive thinking. He's constantly talking about school. And that afternoon, I got a call on my radio, and it was his teacher said, can you come to the classroom? And he had a full-fledged panic attack in the middle of a test, major test anxiety. His is not related, his is not like hers. You know, hers
Yeah.
was more, something's going to happen to me, I'm going to die. His is, I'm going to fail. So, thank goodness, I had my connections already, you know, and we immediately took him in.
Right.
And because we didn't want it to get to that point again with Julia, because it was like constant.
I asked because my son, he's 4, and I notice. Some
Oh, well, and now that I look back, I can see things
Yeah.
with both of them.
Yeah.
But you just don't know as a parent, because kids do grow out of things.
Right.
and-
Yeah.
Yeah, I could tell you more about that later. But, but yeah, but so with that being said, I feel like I don't have a formal training, but I constantly, through webinars and, you know, resources, I'm constantly educating myself about
Nice.
anxiety disorders. Not only does it benefit me, but also I feel like the community, so I can help out.
All right. What theories guide your practice?
And that was funny to me, a funny question, because I had to think back, and I had to Google last night. Because I was like, okay, I remember there was like this one, because I remember the class where we had to know all the theories. Then 19 years later, you're like, well, what am I doing, you know? And then the only reason that I knew some of them is my daughter is taking an AP psychology class this year, which is the...
I love how they do psychology in
Yeah.
high schools now.
And I was like, all right, you want to do that one? Go ahead, you know. And she would come to me and say, well, so what do you know about this? And I'd be like, don't remember that. And she's like, I thought you had a degree in psychology. And I'm like, I don't remember. But when I was looking them
Well,
up,
there's so many.
there are. I'd say the Adlerian, you know,
Yeah.
the personal responsibility, that's a big one in education. Because I always tell the children, I'm not here to solve your problems. I'm here to help you solve them, you know. Because I do think that we all have, you know, it's kind of like the whole teach them to fish, don't fish for them, you know, stereotype of we can't do it for them, so we have to teach them how.
Was
and
Adlerian
empower
with
them.
birth order too? Was that? a
Yeah.
part of
Adlerian
it?
was one
Yeah.
I looked at last night too. I
Right.
was like, Adlerian and Glasser. And Glasser was more of the
Reality,
reality.
yeah.
Yeah, so I was like, those two I remembered. Couldn't remember what they were, but those names I remember. So when I Googled
Because
them
they stood
last
out to
night,
you, that-
yeah, I was like, oh yeah, those are the two.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think I've learned over the years that you learn what works for you, and that sometimes, you know, I'll do something like, oh, darn, that was pretty good. You know what I'm saying? And then sometimes I'll do something and I'm like, okay, we're not doing that again. You know, so you're constantly trial and error.
Yeah.
What's your personal theory on how clients change?
I think, and it may be just due to the clientele that I work with, but I do believe that making children responsible for whatever they do, good and bad, especially letting them make the mistakes that they need to learn to be resilient,
Right.
to learn from their mistakes, and it just teaches them to be more responsible. And I'd rather them do it now in first grade, you know, if they're stealing a piece of candy off Miss So-and-so's desk, then when they're in middle school and they're shoplifting and
It's
they're,
a
you know,
bigger
you hope you
problem.
can catch it early.
What therapeutic techniques or counseling skills do you use with students?
And this is one that I think every year you try to figure out what works for you. And although you're taught the theories when you're in grad school and you gravitate towards a philosophy, you know, or a theory, and I do think that, I think the ones that I mentioned early, you know, the realism, the Adlerian, the Glasser, yeah, those are definitely go along with that, being responsible for making changes in your life. And that is really the biggest thing for me, I think, with this population is teaching them to solve their own problems. I mean, you know, many times counselors, you think, okay, they're going to go and they're going to tell you what to do, you're going to go do it and everything will be fine. But to have them to come up with their own solutions, even in kindergarten. You know, I was in a classroom and we're doing a lesson on conflict resolution, and we're talking about big problems and small problems. And, you know, the teacher's like, they're tattling all the time, but we're trying to empower them to solve their own problems. And so, you know, in the middle of the lesson, we're doing this bingo game, and they're like, he won't let me, you know, he's taking all the chips. And I'm like, big problem or small problem? And one kid's like, big problem. And I'm like, is it scary, dangerous? Somebody could get hurt. And he's like, well, no. I'm like, so you can do it? And then I'll kind of watch them. They're like, well, we could make a deal. You know, and they'll do it, and they just got to practice it. So the teachers, it's a school-wide program where the kids are being empowered to make their own choices. And that helps everybody.
I like that. That's one of my favorite ones. Yeah. Okay, this was, describe the clientele and their challenges.
Okay. So the clientele in our community is we have a mixture, but we have a very affluent population, okay? And then we have an Indian population that is increasing.
I saw a lot of Indian students
Yeah,
doing it.
we have a Hispanic population. It depends on the district line. It's very interesting because you can cross the highway and you probably, there's an elementary school there, and they're probably 90% Hispanic. And then you cross the highway and come over here, and it may be 10%. I mean, it really depends. But that school was very overcrowded, and so they changed the district lines, and we got a lot of that community, which was new for us as far as the language barrier, you
Right.
know. Our school nurse speaks Spanish, so she's kind of our translator. We have to hire translators to come in for the conferences. See, I'm telling you new stuff. And we also, communication-wise and discipline-wise, as far as their cultural, I don't know what you call it, but just the way their culture works, they discipline in a way that, for us, it could mean a DFACS call.
Right.
So we try really hard that if we do have to make a DFACS call on someone, that we stress that, you know, this is a very supportive family. If they are, you know, here's what we know and here's what we know about their culture, so that they approach it a different way. I mean, they're going to do the same thing, but I think it gives them a better understanding of what they're about to walk into.
Can you tell us more about the social worker that you work with?
Yes. Melissa is between 3 schools. She has a middle school and 2 elementary schools. She has that high Hispanic population school. And then she has our school and the middle school. She's housed there, but basically she is our connection between home when we have the parents that we cannot bring into the school.
Right.
I mean, most of our parents, you know, you always want to say they're here too much. Do you know what I'm saying? It's like, do you really need to eat lunch with your child every day? You know, that
can do
kind
that?
of, oh.
I didn't
Yes,
know that.
but we do talk, you know, if we have issues like that, we're like, look, they need to be with their peers, they need to work on their social skills. But then we have those parents that we never hear from, we can't get in touch with, we have concerns, and so she's our go-to person. We go with her sometimes on home visits, but for the most part, we're here doing our curriculum and meeting the needs of the students. We refer to her, she goes and makes the home visits, and then comes back to us and reports back. We do have monthly meetings where we meet with the administration, the psychologist, the school nurse.
And there were 2 meetings,
There
right?
were 2
Right.
meetings.
The SS.
Thank Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, and that's more the academic
I see.
concern. More of our, how would you say it? If we have students with needs in the house, you know what I'm saying, needs in the home, whether they are lacking clothing, financial, means, whether DFACS is already involved. We have some court, like we'll have students that have court mandated counseling that will come here after school and do that
And the school
portion.
lets them in. Then.
Yeah, we do. As long as
Okay.
we, have paperwork, permission, that kind of thing, we don't have a problem. A lot of those kids may stay in our after-school program, because we do offer scholarships for those kids that are having a financial need, and that's the perfect opportunity for them to come in and,
Right.
we'll let them use our rooms. So we meet monthly on those kids. Then, as far as the other meeting that you were talking about, if a student is having a behavior need, like they're struggling in the classroom, or an academic need in the classroom, there's a whole process that we go through that involves the parent about midway through. So basically, these are the kids where they're struggling either in an academic area or behavior. We put together some interventions, and if it's not working, we go to
Go
a
to the next
student
step.
support team.
Got it.
That is where the parents come in, the administration, it's a team, and we sit down and we look at the child and we set specific goals, and we assess, we monitor them. Usually it's interventions that we do with Fidelity on a daily basis, or we do in the morning during our response to intervention time, which is when we work specifically with the kid who has, maybe math is where they're struggling, or reading comprehension, or so we have different things in place to meet those needs. The parent is a part of that, but if we have a parent that can't attend or has the court involved, and our social worker's always there, so if we need to get in touch with this parent and their phones are dead, whatever the case, she is immediately out there. I mean, she is good, and she will take the paperwork to them. Some parents are unable to come in. They don't have a car, whatever the case is. We'll have the meeting without him, and then she'll be our person to go out and basically explain everything we talked about, So she's our liaison between home.
So the defects cases that, let's say they're already involved, defects, then they don't see you, they see.
They're only gonna see me if it is something that affects them in the classroom.
Okay.
So as you know, we all know that the home environment typically, will affect a child in the classroom. But, we may have children in foster care. Those types of programs, they already have into place, typically counseling.
Right.
That's going on, and we don't want to interfere with that.
Got it.
We're not therapists, and most of the students that need that ongoing counseling, we have our resources, the social worker helps as well, and we refer them out into the community. And over the years, when you've been in the community for a while, you have people that that work, then you have people that that don't work, and typically we suggest that they contact their insurance company first, because they'll have their little list.
Right.
And we might say, I know that one, I know that one. So we try to help them find someone that will meet their needs. And if it's a financial issue, then social worker comes in, she's got her free counseling services that they might qualify for.
Do you have parents that ask you questions directly? Like, I'll call you up, how's it? Okay.
Yes, all the time. I would say that parents in general, no matter what their socioeconomic, you kind of have to, I don't want to say talk them into counseling, but they don't have an understanding of what it means, and there's such a negative connotation to it, like, oh. So, we try to work with them and do what we can here. Like, if I have a parent that's concerned about a student, the parent will share their concerns with me, and I will say, let me go into the classroom and observe, let me talk to the teacher, let me check their academics. And many times, my favorite for social issues and everything is to go out in the playground and just not even let them know I'm there, or,
And the teacher
watch them.
usually has a pretty good understanding of what's going on.
And sometimes we will have kids and the teacher will be like, there's a problem? Everything here is fine. And a lot of times that is the case when there are issues at home, because this is their safe place, this is the consistency, they come here to get away from it.
Right.
And we honestly don't wanna rock that boat, we don't wanna bring those, you know what I'm
Problems
saying?
here, yeah.
So, that's when we refer out.
Could you share any differences you're aware of in school counseling depending on education level, as far as like elementary,
Okay.
middle school, high school?
I always like to think of, we're more the preventative, you know, and the older it gets, it's more of the intervention. You know what I'm saying? I mean, we are interventions, but we're doing the educational piece where we're trying to teach them those skills that they need when they're gonna come across difficulties in middle school and high school, and teach them at a very young age, you know, how to set goals and the importance of goal setting and being responsible, all those like core values, you know what I'm saying, that we know is gonna help a person be successful.
Right.
Depending on what school you work at will depend on what your administration expects of you. I have some counselors, some schools where they're not in the rotation, like they don't go with like music, PE, you know, those type of classes that a student once a day has. I'm in the rotation, so it's easy for me to know that I see every kid in my grade levels, kindergarten, first grade, and second grade, within 10 days. I've seen them all.
Okay.
And that is good, but then, you know, it also limits you in what you get to do outside. Like, in the past, I've run a lot of small groups. That doesn't happen now
Right.
because we just don't have the ability. And to be honest, a lot of it has to do with how many teachers you have in the building and how many kids. And we have such a high population that we've got to divide them up somehow, and they need a place to go. And you can only put so many kids in PE and so many kids in music. And if I wasn't in the rotation, I'd be in the classroom anyway, at least twice a month. So they just go ahead and stick me in the rotation.
Yeah, with so many kids, you do need two counselors.
Yes, yes, definitely.
In what ways do you utilize multicultural counseling competencies in your work?
And I think I might have mentioned, but we, as a district, we try to be very culturally aware, and they offer us trainings at the district level where we go to. I had mentioned that we have a high Indian population, so that has been something that a lot of counselors have struggled with because culturally their view of education is so different than ours. And their view of discipline, just many different things.
Right,
It's just
yeah.
cultural. And we have to be aware of that. It kind of gives you a better understanding, gives you maybe a little more patience. You know, you think, well, wouldn't they know that? You know what I'm saying? But it's just very interesting in general, you know, to counselors, because we're in the psychology of people. But I would say that at the district level, we do the professional development. I would say that for the children, you know, we are constantly at a young age talking about differences and accepting people for their differences and valuing everyone. And we have a program that we run here that I did mention earlier called BRAVE. And the acronym stands for Being Respectful and Valuing Everyone. And it kind of goes along with our anti-bullying, you know?
Right.
So when you get into those types of programs about how to respect and treat others, there's always going to be that cultural piece that falls into it. Because most of that bullying and everything, it stems from you're different than me, you know,
Right.
so I'm going to treat you this way. Not always, but we definitely weave it through in our curriculum.
What do you see as current issues that the counseling profession is facing?
As far as the profession,
Yeah, it's the profession itself.
the profession I think, and maybe I answered it wrong, but the profession I think would be more of helping others to understand why we're important.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Because,
Oh, yeah.
and I know we talked about that data piece of it a little bit, because it is so hard to measure what we do. A lot of it is perception. I mean, parents will say, oh my goodness, you know, Johnny's doing so much better, I don't know what you said to them, but, you know, it's better now, and the teachers say, oh yeah, they came around, that's all they needed, you know what I'm saying, we'll just keep monitoring. But as far as, when you think of academics, we can look at test scores and we can look at report cards, and we can say, oh, they improved in math by 20%, you know. So we do reports where we use data, we're very data driven, but a lot of it is perception data, and so I think that is why the profession is so misunderstood. when we know it's beneficial, but it's hard to put it into numbers. And
Yeah.
we are such a number-oriented culture, you know.
What does your typical day look like for you?
Typically, we will begin, I'd say, I typically am in the class 4 times. I'm in 4 different classrooms throughout the day, 40 minutes each, so about half my class, half my day is spent in the classroom, but it's kind of split up. So if I'm not in the classroom, I'm either talking to parents, parent conferences, teacher conferences, meeting with teachers during their planning, or making those phone calls to the social worker, or meeting with the administrators about concerns. I'd say that's when we're doing our intentional. That's when we have these kids and we need to help these kids in general, you know? So I would say that a lot of interventions, crisis intervention, and that referral process is gonna happen in between classroom. Because it's just as important, but when you've got a teacher that's expecting you at this certain time, I mean, it's hard. I mean,
Yeah.
yesterday I had to cut a parent off and I felt horrible on the phone. I was like, bus duty and I have to release 1,200 kids and can I call you back, you know, because you do have those things that you are expected to do to run a school.
Right.
So, and you can't just, you know, say, oh, somebody will take care
And
of
it's
it.
hard to cut off a parent,
Oh, it's
especially about
horrible.
something so
Yeah.
important. You know what I
But
mean?
honestly, when you say I've got to go get the buses ready so the kids can leave, you know,
They
if you
know,
tell them
yeah.
instead of look, I can't talk right now, I try to let them know.
Yeah.
But you know, you call and you expect, oh, I'll make a quick phone call before 15, 20 minutes, and then 40 minutes later you're like, ooh.
Yeah.
So, but anyway,
What do you like most about your job?
I of course the kids, which I never thought I would like, little kids, but. You know what? Younger kids have such an appreciation, and as they get older, I worked a year in middle school. Then you know that's the year where the parents don't know anything, teachers don't know anything. But I can see and perceive even though I can't calculate it, the difference that I make, and to me, I mean maybe that's a selfish thing, but it makes me feel good. So
Right.
I enjoy knowing that I'm helping someone, whether it's a parent or a child or a teacher.
And what would be the least?
Yeah, and the least would be those difficult defects calls that you have to make, because even though you know you're a mandated reporter, that's why it's so important to have that sounding board and that mentor. Even though you know what you have to do, it's hard because you know, I mean, I imagine myself sometimes, what if, you know, my son showed up with a mark and they didn't, you know, what if somebody, I mean, I can only imagine how you are affecting these children, these families' lives, and so I do think of that every time I make a call.
Right.
So, and it's hard. It's hard. You know, you're doing the right thing, but you know.
But if there's not an issue, there's not an issue. You know, I think they're pretty. The social workers are good with that. You know, they know what. You know?
I do. But even just the thought, I'm telling you, especially because maybe it is because of the high socioeconomic.
Right.
Because if I make a referral, and that sounds horrible, but some families I'm not that worried about. The defects has probably been involved before, you know, that kind of thing. And sometimes I know that they have. But if it's a good family, and I know this family, because you do get to know the families after 9 years, and you're thinking, maybe this is wrong, but I'm like, I know that I do not think that they're abusing this child. But
Right.
this kid said this, and this is here, and I know by law I have to. It's
Right.
tough.
Yeah.
What is the most difficult situation you've ever dealt with?
Oh, yeah. We were talking about new areas of counseling that have come to light in the school system, and I think within Forsyth County, this is not just our school, but I'm trying to think of the politically correct term, but basically, y'all know what I'm trying to say.
Gender identity?
Thank you. I guess gender identity would be it. That is something new that typically I think in the schools, I mean, it's always been there, but I think a lot of people are more accepting of it, and therefore
Which is a
parents are
good
bringing
thing,
it
yeah.
to like earlier. Do you know what I'm saying? So in
Right.
other words, I was, you know, a few years ago, the most difficult conversation I'd had in 19 years is to talk to a mother about her child's sexual identity, you know, and I was not trying to say it is or it isn't, but trying to hint to her so that she would get him help, you
Right.
know. As I might have mentioned off camera, that this parent was already aware. So it was actually a good thing because she couldn't find resources. I had a difficult time finding resources. The social worker had a difficult time finding resources. But together we were able to find someone to meet their needs.
But the father wasn't really liking it.
Yeah, and you know what? That's another thing, the divorce situation. That's really hard, you know, for teachers, counselors, everybody involved. I'd say that custody agreements and transportation, I mean, I can remember when we used to get on the school bus every day, and we get off the school bus every day. And now you got kids that's like, well, Thursday, Friday, they go to their dad's, but on every other Tuesday, they're going to be in after school, but I mean, it's crazy,
Oh, yeah.
you know, so we're getting on the bus, we're like, is Johnny on the right bus, you know? So that is just,
We gotta
it's
check
crazy,
this.
it's crazy.
Are you involved in professional counseling or psychology organizations, and if so, which ones?
And the two that we are most likely to be involved in, you don't have to, but is the Georgia School Counselors Association. They work not only to provide professional development, but they actually hire people to go to legislation for us, basically trying to prove our worth again, it seems like. And there are laws into place as far as, you know, the counselor to student ratio. So they're trying to advocate for us. And then there is our national organization that not only advocates for us nationally, but they are really huge into putting a model, a blueprint into place as to what counseling should look like. Here's what your goals are, here's what topics should be covered. And they work with all counselors, community counselors, everyone involved, and basically they take all these resources and decide what curriculum we should be teaching and what our standards should be. So they set the standards based on a lot of different counseling.
What advice would you offer us as beginning counselors in training?
And I would say two things now I think about it. If you're in training, you know, everything that you're learning is beneficial, but there's so much that they can't teach you that will come with experience. And I would say because counseling in the school setting, you know, there may be one or two counselors at a school compared to 70 teachers, that you need to have a support somewhere, a sounding board, a mentor that you can refer back to, because you know, grade levels have their committee, but you kind of are on your own in a little bit because you're the only one that truly knows what you do. You have another counselor, great, you know, you got to find time to meet with them and run things by them and support each other. And also taking care of yourself, because in the beginning it is a very emotional job, depending on what happens that year, but it's new to you, and so you got to kind of learn to not take it home with you, you know, and be good to yourself so that you can be good to the kids.
And to have a mentor.
The mentor, definitely.
Do
yeah.
you have one?
I did. When I first moved into this county, my mentor was actually at one of the two schools I worked at, and her office was across from mine, so it was awesome. You know, I could totally just go across there. I would say that there's been so many changes in this county recently. We've grown so much, and there are so many more counselors. When I came to this county, there was a handful of us, so we all knew everyone. Last year, I went into a new meeting with counselors. I was like, I don't know half these people, you know. So we have to try really hard to make that time to meet and to work together and to collaborate together. And a lot of that is done through technology, because we run our school curriculum through It's Learning, and we're constantly sharing lessons and, you know, coming up, making sure everybody's using the same standards. And we just really, I mean, you have to be willing to be a part of the team.
And you
wanna
meet
do
with
what's
your
best.
other counselor too.
Yes,
here.
we try, and that's really hard. If you don't
Yeah.
make time to do it, it will not happen. So we set aside one Monday, an hour every other Monday, where we try to touch base. I mean, and we're still touching base in between, and we still have our county meetings, and we still have our SST meetings, and we still have our share team meetings where we're working together. But we have to have that time. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
You're
Your
welcome.
answers are so great.
Oh,
They
I
really
don't
were.
know.
No, they
I was
really
like,
were.
I'm thinking like, one more little thing I could sneak in there.
I